Welcome to Positive Psychology and Work Stress, when stressors make you grow. We're happy you're here. My name is Yusra Benjeloun, Administrative Coordinator and Project Manager with the Work Wellness and Disability Prevention Institute, and I'll be co-moderating the webinar today. This webinar is made possible through the support of the Community Gaming Grant Program through the BC Government, as well as donations and memberships to WWDPI. We thank our program partners, Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, Education Advisory Committee, and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. While we're waiting for others to join us, I'll go over a few technical points for the webinar. You should be able to hear the presentation through your computer speakers or through a conference call line if you dialed in. Please use the question box to submit any issues you may be experiencing and to ask any questions you have related to the presentation. We will collect questions submitted throughout the presentation and follow it with a Q&A based on the questions submitted. Any questions not answered in the allotted time will be answered and distributed after the event. The presentation will be recorded and posted for free on our website within a week, along with the slides. Today's webinar will be co-moderated by Dr. Jamie Grumman, Professor and Senior Research Fellow in the Department of Management at the University of Guelph. Dr. Grumman will be moderating our Q&A session, and I will let him introduce himself and Dr. Gloria Gonzalez-Morales, who will be our presenter today.
Thank you, Yusra. Jamie here. Let me introduce you to our wonderful speaker today. Dr. Gloria Gonzalez-Morales is Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph and the Research Director of the Occupational Health and Positive Psychology Lab and co-founder of the Center for Workers' Health and Wellbeing. Her research has been funded with scholarships and grants, including a prestigious Fulbright scholarship and funding from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. Her studies involve the disciplines of occupational health psychology and positive organizational psychology and focuses on stress, work-life issues, victimization, incivility and civility, and positive organizational interventions to enhance well-being and performance. She is Associate Editor of Work and Stress Journal, and her research has been published in some of the world's top-ranked psychology outlets such as Journal of Applied Psychology, Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, Work and Stress, and Journal of Organizational Behavior. In addition, she serves on the editorial boards of Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, Stress and Health, Anxiety, Stress and Coping, and Occupational Health Science. She's been recently awarded the 2017 Best Paper Award of the European Journal of Work and Organizational Psychology for her research on respite workplace interventions to foster employee well-being. Dr. Gonzalez-Morales has more than 10 years of experience consulting for organizations from different sectors: government, healthcare, hospitality, energy, nonprofits, manufacturing. The last 7 years as Executive Director of Organization and Management Solutions, she's led more than 20 consulting projects in diverse areas of practice. For example, competency modeling and recruitment and selection systems, organization development and change, needs analysis, performance management systems, engagement surveys, leadership and team development and training. And so without further ado, I introduce you to Dr. Gloria Gonzalez-Morales.
Thank you, Dr. Grumman. Thank you, Yusra. I'm very excited to present here my webinar about positive psychology and work stress. And I'm going to be talking about the conditions that we need so stressors can make us grow. So our agenda for today, we'll start with trying to figure out what is work stress. Let's explain a little bit what it is. Then we will discuss if stress is always negative. I will talk about a couple of models of stress, the challenge and hindrance model and the cognitive appraisal model. Then I will present one of my papers where we started to look into the mechanisms through which stressors can make us better employees, more healthy, and perform better by appraising challenges as opportunities or as obstacles in our workplace. And then I will propose the resource mobilization model to explain how we can make that happen. I will start by revising some previous resource models, and then I will explain that the key actually is in the resources, both organizational and personal. So let's start with what is work stress. And we're going to start by me asking you some questions, and I will give you a little bit of time to think about the answer. So think about what are the stressful conditions that you identify at work. What are those things that activate your organism when they happen? Most of them sometimes are related to having too much work to do, for example, like in the Dilbert cartoon. Other times it could be conflict between the tasks that you have to do, or even conflict with other people in the workplace. Now, think about what indicates to you that you feel stressed out. Like in this comic, in the PhD comics, you feel that the computer is going to eat you. What are these feelings of activation that you have when you feel stressed out? Okay, now, how does your body respond to this stress experience, either physically or psychologically or both? We know that when we are stressed at work, we usually have insomnia, and that leads also to being very, very sleepy during the day, having to work, manage workload, being sleepy, not having enough energy, and then the cycle goes on and on again. For me, I have a rash on my arms when stress is hitting me hard. Also, I can get a cold because my immune system is diminished, or even just back pain, very, very, very bad back pain that I cannot deal with. And then finally, another part of stress is how do you deal with these experiences? Some people go to yoga, or they have learned to use meditation and relaxation to handle the stress. Some people prefer to pour a couple of glasses of wine at the end of the day. Those are emotion-focused coping strategies that are based on releasing the emotional effects that stress has on us. But there's also problem-focused strategies, like, for example, planning ahead, time management, or, for example, learning mindfulness in order to be more mindful about the stimulus and the conditions in which we are, and think about better ways of coping with them. So stress is a lot of things. It's the stressors, meaning the stimuli that we can say are the causal antecedents of the start of that process of stress. They also are the feeling of being stressed out, or the stressfulness of the situation. And that's when those stimuli are appraised or perceived. So these are the mediating process of stress. And then we have effects, how we respond to that stress. So we call those strain or de-stress. And also there's what do we do about it? So we call that coping. And coping are those changing cognitive and behavioral efforts that we use to manage the demands that are appraised as stressful. So this is the transactional model of stress that was proposed by Lazarus and Feldman. And the main aspect of it that we're going to be focusing on today on the webinar is that stress is about the transaction between those stimuli, those causal antecedents that are demands that we perceive in our workplace and resources that we have. When we have these, we actually create a cognitive appraisal of the resources that we have, the demands that we are facing, and how we can cope about it. And that's what makes the situation stressful or not. Okay, so now we know what is work stress. Let's go into the question that we may be asking ourselves. Is stress always negative? And this is something that we had assumed for a lot of years, that being stressed out is not a good thing, because usually being stressed out is related to having a bucket that is broken and feeling exhaustion, and then all your energy, all that you have in order to put into your work just drains out and you cannot go any further. too much stress and too much feelings of this can lead to things like burnout. But there are situations where, because our bucket is fine, doesn't have any holes, when they give us a challenge, we go for it. And we grow by dealing with something that maybe is stressful, but we can think about it as positive, as something that is going to help us develop. The first time that they thought about this was in 2000, when they proposed the challenge hindrance classification of stressors. It's a very parsimonious model, very simple. They say there's two types of stressors in the workplace: challenge stressors and hindrance stressors. Challenge stressors are those that give us an opportunity for development and achievement, and hindrance stressors are those that are seen as obstacles to personal growth and task accomplishment. They actually did the research and figure out what kind of workplace stressors are challenges and which ones are hindrances. The challenge ones are related to the number of projects, the volume of work, the time that we have to do this work, and the responsibility that it entails. The hindrance stressors are things like having to deal with politics, not being able to understand what is expected from us, having to go through red tape to do our jobs, or feeling that our jobs are insecure or there's no opportunities for promotion. Actually, meta-analytical evidence, and that means that they have done research where they put together all the papers and all the studies that have been looking at different types of stressors and how they are related to organizational outcomes and personal outcomes. So by pulling in all these studies together, they can show what is actually the direction of an effect. So it shows that challenge stressors are related to higher job satisfaction, higher organizational commitment, and lower turnover intentions. They also are related to higher performance, but there's a caveat. They're also related to higher strain. When we think about challenge and hindrances in the workplace, yes, can lead to higher performance and satisfaction and things like that. But we have to think about the costs to our well-being. Also, thinking about it, they are suggesting that these type of items, the challenge stressors, are always challenging, that people always see in the number of projects or assignments they have an opportunity to growth, or that the degree to which politics rather than performance affects organizational decisions is always an obstacle or a hindrance. But what if I'm good at politics and negotiation? What if I love paperwork? Give me a job with a lot of red tape. That's the only thing that I'm going to do all day, but that's what I love. Or what if I like to change jobs every 2 years because I get so bored by the time that I master my job? Well, then maybe these hindrance and stressors are not that hindering depending on that situation. Similarly, the challenge stressors, the amount of time I spend at work, is that a challenge always? What if I have young children at home and can't dedicate as much time to work as I used to? What if my supervisor doesn't support my request for assistance on extra tasks? What if I don't want to take on more responsibility and the scope of responsibility in my position entails grows and grows? And this may be the reason why the meta-analysis show that yes, challenge stressors lead to higher performance, but that it could also lead to higher strain. So that model, that parsimonious model, is assuming that these demands objectively lead to challenge or hindrance, but is ignoring what we had discussed before, that is the cognitive appraisal. And I'm going to go deeper on that now. So cognitive appraisals, they come from Lazarus and Pullman theory. And they say that there's two types of appraisals, primary and secondary. It's not that they happen, one happens first and the other. It's just that they are related to different things. Primary appraisal is related to how we perceive the stimulus, the demand, the situation. And secondary appraisal refers to what can we do about it. And we are making that appraisal at the same time, taking into account those two considerations. So let me give you an example. When we're doing primary appraisal, there's three options: that the situation is irrelevant, benign or positive, or stressful. So for example, we see a lion, but we see this lion, pretty cute, huh? So that means that we probably are going to have a primary appraisal that leads to a benign, positive reaction. Or if you don't like, pretty cute things, and, it's very cute, I'm just looking at it, you may think that is irrelevant. But 2 years later, this lion may be kind of stressful because it's indicating the high possibility of harm or loss of your life, or the threat to get harm or loss of your life. But there's people that would do anything for a selfie. So even though it's stressful, because I bet this guy's heart is beating pretty fast, they see this as a challenge. I'm going to take a selfie with a lion. So it's stressful, but in a different way. Then at the same time, you're thinking about the secondary appraisal. What can be done? When you are seeing this lion, if you're at the zoo and it's behind bars or in its enclosure, you're not going to see it as a harm, loss, or threat, not even a challenge, maybe just benign and positive because it's cool to see a lion. So when you mix the primary appraisal and the secondary appraisal, you actually form an appraisal of, is this a challenge or a hindrance? If you are the one that thinks that the lions are cute, you may end up thinking like this, like Tweety about cats. And that actually sometimes is not good neither. So challenge or hindrance is not something that can be decided beforehand and say, hey, we're going to give I just learned, read this 2000 paper, and I'm going to give to all my employees all these stressors. I'm going to create this stressful environment with a lot of projects, a lot of time pressure, a lot of responsibility, because I read this paper and it says that there's higher satisfaction and higher performance. Well, I'm sorry, but for that, they have to perceive it as a challenge. And we actually did a research study to figure out if that appraisal, that hypothesis, that challenge and hindrance is a question of perception and not just something that is set up as these conditions are challenges or hindrances. So we did this study where we look at cognitive appraisal. And that's our next segment in the webinar. We're going to talk about when stressors make you work. So this paper, this study I developed with my colleague Pedro Neves from Nova University of Lisbon. And we decided that we wanted to look into that appraisal aspect only with challenge stressors, just to make it simple. So these are the items, remember, the number of projects, amount of time, volume of work, responsibility, that we wanted to test. So usually, all this meta-analytical evidence that I told you about was based on the idea that these type of stressors were measured on how stressful they were, without asking how much of an opportunity or how much of an obstacle these represented for their development or their health or their performance. What we did was to ask people for each item to tell us how much of an obstacle they think the situation is and how much of an opportunity. But does this way of measuring challenges as obstacles and opportunities make sense? Well, we actually tested it with the students at the university. We use a modified item that would reflect the work in classes and academic work. And what we found was that when we asked them in that way, how much of an opportunity and how much of an obstacle or threat each situation is, their answers cluster in two different factors. They cluster on a factor that we call obstacle appraisal, and they cluster in another factor we call opportunity appraisal. In theory, If it was true that challenge and hindrances are separate and people always see these challenge situations as challenging, then the opportunity and obstacle ratings, those ratings that we have separated per item, would be dependent and negatively correlated. So a correlation, and this is a side note, represents the level of relationship that two things have. When a correlation is one, is total overlap. When something goes up, the other thing goes up in the same magnitude. Or if it is a negative correlation, if something increases, the other thing decreases in the same magnitude. When there's a correlation of 0.50, there is a fair amount of overlap, but there's still some independent effects. And when the correlation is 0, there's no overlap. Whatever happens to this thing or this concept doesn't have any bearing on whatever happens to the other one. So for these ratings of opportunity and obstacle ratings, we were expecting that if challenge stressors are always challenging, that this correlation would be high and negative. So the more opportunity appraisal, the lower obstacle appraisal. But we actually were not expecting that. We wanted it to be independent. And that's what we found. The correlation for a lot of items was non-significant, was closer to 0. Only for 2 was negatively correlated, but very low, 0.25. So this is a quarter of overlap. So what we found was that they were independently and weakly correlated. So that was good for us. That meant that our measurement strategy was working. And also we look into if challenge stressors, when they were rated by students as obstacles or opportunities at the beginning of the semester, if they were correlated with academic distress at the end of the semester. So we measure at the beginning, then 12 weeks passed, and by the time that the exams were started, we measure their distress. And for people who rated those challenge stressors as obstacles, there was a correlation of 0.24, not super high, but something there that was affecting their distress levels. So based on that, we built our model to test with employees. So we were thinking, let's try to figure out if the appraisal of obstacles or opportunities can affect those buckets that we have been talking about, like the feelings of the effects of stress, the negative effects of the stress, or the positive effects of opportunity that help us develop and fulfill our buckets, and then how that relates to performance. So let's go step by step. We propose that obstacle appraisal, because it involves appraising things as obstacles for our health or our performance, would lead to higher levels of distress. In this case, we measure distress asking for psychosomatic complaints, things like backaches, headaches, sleep problems, exhaustion, stomach problems. And then we expected also that this distress, because people are feeling less healthy, their well-being is damaged, that should damage also the performance, both intra-role and extra-role. Intra-role performance refers to the tasks that we are expected to do in our job. Extra-role performance is related to those tasks that we do, or those things that we do over and above our job to help others, for example. So an item that we use to measure intra-role performance is when the supervisor says that their employees perform tasks that are expected of them. And the extra-role performance would be when the supervisor rates their employees, saying they're always ready to help or to lend a helping hand to those around them. Then, on the other hand, we were thinking, okay, so if there's opportunity appraisal, what is going on? Well, we propose a social exchange motivation mechanism there. Social exchange is a theory that suggests that in our social relationships, we base our behavior on exchanging favors, let's say favors. So if you do something for me, I will feel I will feel that I have to return the favor. And that's what is called the norm of reciprocity. We live in societies where the norm of reciprocity is pretty strong. If you do something for me, I will feel uncomfortable until I'm able to return the favor to you. So applied to organizations, we assume that when organizations provide us with a good environment to work, when our supervisors are supportive, when we have resources to do our best job, when we are given opportunities to be creative and innovative at work, then we feel in depth with the organization. We also feel connected to the organization, and that's what we call affective commitment to the organization. It's a psychological state of emotional attachment, identification, and involvement with the organization. And that's what we use to indicate that people may feel connected and in need to reciprocate to the organization. And the way that they would reciprocate, and that's where we have the motivation mechanism, is through performing better or more, both at the intra role within my job and extra role to help the organizational success. So for example, an item to measure affective commitment to the organization is, I really feel as if this organization's problems are my own. So now we have two mechanisms through which each appraisal works to affect performance in the workplace. If we perceive obstacles, we feel distress, that damages our performance. If we perceive opportunities in our workplaces, we feel connected to the organization, we feel in depth for providing us with a good environment to work, and that leads to higher performance. Also, what we were expecting is that that opportunity appraisal may buffer or may protect us from feeling distress. And also we were expecting that perceiving obstacles in our jobs may lower how much we get identified and attached to our organization. So that would be lower affective commitment to the organization. So we did this study with participants from various Portuguese organizations. We were able to collect data from 284 dyads, so 284 pairs of supervisor and subordinate, because subordinates or employees answer their a survey about their appraisal of stressors, either opportunities and obstacles, and their feelings of distress and their feelings of affective commitment to the organization. And the supervisors responded a survey about that employee in terms of their extra role performance and intra-role performance. So remember, these were the items that were used to ask people, how much do you see this as an obstacle and how much do you see this as an opportunity? What we found was that, as we were expecting, obstacle appraisal was related to distress. The more obstacle appraisal, the more distress, and the more distress, the lower intra-role performance. We didn't find any, the result, the coefficient, the number that we got wasn't strong enough to suggest that distress affected extra-role performance. And this may be, and that's just an hypothesis from a feminist perspective, because we had more than 60% women in the sample, and extra-role performance in form of relational labor and emotional labor is expected from women. And they actually, even though it may be rated in an extra-role survey, it may be part of the intra-role because it's what they're expected to do, to help others, to be there for them, to always volunteer for extra time, because women are expected to do more of that. Okay, now that I have finished my my feminist discussion of that result, in terms of opportunity appraisal, we also found that there was a strong relationship between opportunity appraisal and affective commitment. So the more opportunities they perceived in the workplace, the higher they felt committed to the organization, and these drove performance both at the intra and the extra role. So this is a summary of those, and remember that we were looking at these cross effects. We didn't find anything in relation to opportunity protecting employees from feeling distress, but we found that obstacles, actually perceiving obstacles in the workplace, was related to lower affective commitment, lower positive attitudes towards the organization. And that's not something that is very good. Okay, so the main ideas that we can subtract from this is that challenge stressors are not always challenging, that obstacle or opportunity appraisal have different effects on health, attitudes, and performance through these two mechanisms, so induced distress and a motivation social exchange. But the question now is, what makes people see stressors as opportunities? How can we offer employees opportunities to grow and perform? So let's go now to the answer to that is my resource mobilization model that I want to suggest can be used to think about this. So the resource mobilization model is inspired by two models that are previous to that. And that will help us understand how obstacle appraisal and opportunity appraisal are formed. The first is the job demands resource model. According to the Morotti in 2000 and then other developments later, there's two types of characteristics in our jobs, job demands and job resources. Job demands require sustained physical or mental efforts that results in psychological costs. Examples are role conflict, emotional demands or responsibility. So these actually are the stressors that we have been talking about in the first part of the webinar. Job resources are those job characteristics that reduce demands, facilitate task accomplishment, and stimulate personal development. Things like having a variety of skills to be used in your job, autonomy, coaching, leadership. According to their model, job demands lead to burnout over time through a health impairing process, very similar to the stress-induced process that we were talking about before, because we use this model as inspiration. And job resources lead to engagement through a motivational process. In this case, similar to what we're talking about, there's a social exchange mechanism through which if the organization gives me resources, I feel compelled to continue putting effort on the organization and on my job. They also say that resources buffer the relationship between demands and burnout. It makes it weaker, and demands can put a strain in the relationship between resources and engagement. From now on, I'm going to talk instead of burnout about distress, because this model has been applied to a lot of different outcomes and not only burnout, and growth, because this model has also been used for explaining not only engagement, but other variables like well-being and performance and things like that. So our buckets are back here. The other model that I like to introduce is the conservation of resources, or what we call CORE. Conservation of resources talks about stress not as demands, but as resources. According to Hopeful, stress is a threat, loss, or insufficient gain of tangible or intangible resources. And what are resources? Well, they can be objects like a house or a car. They could be personal characteristics like resilience or knowledge. They can be conditions like supervisor support or living in a strong community. Or it could be energies like time or stamina. These resources are resources because they're either valued by the individual or they're means for attaining other resources. Okay, so now let's go back to the job demands resource model. It looks like CORE suggests that stress is not because of the demands, it's because of feeling that there's going to be a lack of resources. So let's move that to the side. And now let's start working on building this resource mobilization model. If resources are here and job demands are here, and remember we were trying to figure out what makes people perceive things as opportunities or as obstacles, right? So let's talk about obstacle demands and opportunity demands. And maybe what's happening is that resources are one of the things that have to be taken into consideration that can predict why people or how people perceive certain demands as obstacles or certain demands as opportunities to grow. So now we have our hearts here about our obstacle appraisal and our opportunity appraisal. But this is just theory. Gloria, tell me something, like give me some evidence. Okay, here we go. We did this study with a municipality in the US, and we actually had obstacle appraisal, opportunity appraisal, and we also measured some resources. The resources that we measured were perceived organizational support and perceived organizational tangible resources. Perceived organizational support refers to employees' perception concerning the extent to which the organization values their contributions and cares about their well-being. Items that we use to measure that are, for example, in this case, we did it by department. My department shows very little concern for me. That's a negative worded item. Or my department takes pride in my accomplishments at work. So that gives you an idea of what kind of resource is that, feeling that your department is backing you up. And then perceived organizational tangible resources is just that. Are there tangible resources to aid employees? An item, for example, was my department has the means to assist its employees in their work if it chooses to do so. So we expected that these resources will lead to lower obstacle appraisal and higher opportunity appraisal. We found that, but we also found something very interesting, that opportunity appraisal was best predicted when we had both of them into account at the same time. So the best departments where there was more opportunity appraisal were those where there was a high perceived organizational support up here and high perceived organizational resources. When there was a combination of those, not only perceived, not only, oh, I feel that the organization backs me up, but also I know that the organization has the resources to help me, then people saw more opportunities on those challenges, stressors, than obstacles. Okay, so now we go back to our resource mobilization model. But remember what we talk about core, right? So there's something else about core that is very interesting, and this idea of the spirals. Individuals are motivated to mitigate their losses and to accumulate gains to protect for future loss, right? Because stress by core is defined as feeling stressed out about losing resources. And there's a corollary in this theory that says that initial losses lead to future losses, and then initial gains lead to future gains. And those are resource spirals, like gain spirals and loss spirals. So when you think about what obstacle appraisal or opportunity appraisal is, remember, opportunity is when you feel that there's opportunities in the situation to grow and develop. An obstacle is when we think that there's obstacles for our growth and development and performance. When we think about it is that when you see an obstacle, it's because you feel that your bucket is broken, and that if you invest resources, what you're going to get is losses. You're not going to get any resources from there. It's just that you just have to invest the resources that you have to deal with it, and it's not going to give you any gains. So that means more loss. When you see things as opportunities, it's because you feel that when you are going to be investing the resources that you have, you're going to get more resources in return. There's going to be gains. So instead of a health impairing process, let's talk about a resource loss process when we see things as obstacles, and a resource gain process when we see things as opportunities. And this is how we go into the resource mobilization model. In order to see obstacles, it's going to happen because we don't have enough resources to invest. If we don't have enough resources to invest, then whatever demand that is put in front of us is going to signal that we're going to invest whatever we have that is not much, and that we're going to lose resources. And that losing of resources is going to lead to distress, because we're going to put more and more and not gain anything. If we have enough resources, if we have a good pool of resources, we will see conditions and demands as opportunities, because I have all these resources to invest. I'm going to invest them. I'm going to grow my resource pool. When growing your resource pool, that's when growth happens. So if you think about what I just explained and some of the research that I that I just described here, it kind of is very related to the model. We know that obstacle appraisal leads to distress, so that lower resource and distress here, and that opportunity appraisal leads to effective commitment, so feeling that there's resources in the organization, more resources here, and more performance. We also know that perceived organizational support, both tangible and intangible, actually predicts opportunity appraisal and less obstacle appraisal. But what are the practical implications of this? Because I have been giving you a lot of theoretical ideas. Well, resources. Resources is what you have to be sure that you have in order to make stressors make you work. So we already talked about organizational resources. In the job demands resource model, they describe resources as autonomy and skill variety. We talk about tangible organizational resources, perceived organizational support, social support, or leadership and coping and coaching. But there's also personal resources. We know, for example, in a study in 2002, they found that when students were given a task, they separated students in two groups. Both students were doing the same task, but one group was told that in order to succeed in this task, they just needed to put effort, consistency, and focus. So they were giving them control over the task. The other group was told that in order to succeed in this task, they should have taken this seminar that would give them the knowledge and skills to succeed in this task, but they hadn't had time to take this seminar, so they took control away from them. What happened was the group that was told that only effort, consistency, and focus was required, that group saw that task as challenging, as something that will let them grow, and they actually perform much better than the other group that didn't perceive that task as challenging but as hindering. In a study that I performed, in a preliminary study that I did like now a decade ago, we were looking at what were the personal resources that could predict this hindrance or challenge appraisal or obstacle or opportunity. And we found that work-related self-efficacy and optimism reduce the possibility of seeing the responsibility stressor as an obstacle, but optimism increase the opportunity appraisal for that responsibility stressor. Also, we looked at coping styles, and we saw how future-oriented coping and avoidance coping were related to, this one was related to future-oriented coping to lower obstacle appraisal and avoidance coping to lower opportunity appraisal. So there's evidence that there's both organizational resources and personal resources that are going to help us see things as either opportunities or obstacles. So now the model, you have to take into account that there's organizational resources and personal resources. Okay. So how can we offer employees opportunities to grow and perform? Well, we want to be sure that employees see the demands as opportunities and not as obstacles. And for doing that, we need to be sure that we provide enough organizational resources and that they have the personal resources to deal with them. Okay? And by doing that, we also actually can influence that cognitive appraisal that help us see things in a stressful way, but in a challenging way. Okay, so I will give you a framework on how to do that from an organizational perspective. We have demands and resources. Demands that can be perceived as obstacles or as opportunities, and resources that can be perceived as personal, that can be personal or organizational resources. So what can we do? In terms of demands, the agents for that should be employee, supervisor, and management, higher management, organization. In relation to obstacles, we should be able to identify obstacles and obtain tangible resources to manage them. In relation to opportunities, we should be able to identify opportunities for employee growth and incorporate those opportunities and the resources needed to deal with them successfully into employees' jobs. In terms of resources, in relation to personal resources, the employee should be able to identify what are the things that they need to work on, what are the type of personal resources that they need. But the organization and the supervisors should be supportive of that, should provide interventions and initiatives that allow that increase of personal resources. For example, mindfulness training, or maybe some kind of technological skill development for new changes in the job. In terms of organizational resources, the agent's responsibility is heavily placed on supervisors and higher management. Organizational and supervisory support are required. We need that. We need that employees perceive that. So there's open conversations to identify obstacles, opportunities, and to provide helpful resources for those. And I'm out of time, but that means that you have the opportunity to sign up for the next webinars to help you with every single aspect of this. So for example, in May 14, Dr. Bakker is going to be talking more about preventing job burnout. So he will talk more about demands as obstacles, opportunities for well-being. Then in relation to personal resources, stay tuned for June 20th and July 11th, where Dr. Kaplan and Dr. Winslow will talk about evidence-based interventions, what the science tells us that work, what doesn't work, and specific interventions that you can think about implementing. And then for the organizational, for those supervisors and management, July 24th, we have Dr. Manzani talking about character and leadership. So a positive psychology focus on leadership, on how to create that support for employees. So this is all that I had to say today. Thank you very much. And I'm now open for questions.
Well, thank you, Gloria, for a very interesting and detailed presentation. I'll remind everybody that if you have any questions for Dr. Gonzalez-Morales, please feel free to type them in, and I will be happy to read them and have her answer them. We do have some that have come in already. So, Gloria, I think you've answered a couple of these, at least somewhat, but I'll go through them and see if you have any other thoughts to add here. So the first question is, can employers influence the perception of their employees on stressors related to work, and if so, how? Yeah, I think that
that question may have been at the beginning of the webinar. Yeah, the idea is that we can influence the perception, because the perception is based not only on demands, but also on the resources that they perceive that they have available. So even if the employer thinks that their employees have the resources available, they have to make it clear to them that they're available to them. So for example, there's when we have work family conflict, and we want to use a policy to take a leave of absence or to work on telework, that policy may be available, but the employee may not be aware if the supervisor supports or not the use of that policy, for example. So supervisors that have to make a clear effort of saying, hey, it is okay to use those policies. There's not going to be backlash, or when there's promotion, I'm still going to think about you for a promotion, even though you have been working through telework, for example.
Yeah, let me just follow up on that question a little bit. And I think you've, again, alluded to this already, but the idea that we can provide employees with resources to help them manage their work lives assumes that all employees are going to view resources the same way. Do you think that that's the case, or do different employees view the different available resources in different ways? And so do managers need to work with people to help them see resources in a certain way?
I think that's a great question, Jamie, and that makes a lot of sense. And that's why I think the idea of personal resources and organizational resources together makes sense. It's not just providing them, or it's not just hiring for very resilient employees, right? There has to be a match, a fit, and most of the time what you need is conversations. You need supervisors that are able to create high quality relationships with their employees, so there can be open conversations about what's going on. What are the demands that they're seeing as hindering, or what are the things that they would love to do, but they need this kind of resource or this other resource that For the supervisor, it may be clear, no, you have enough to do your thing, your job, but for the employee, it may not be that clear, or they may need additional assistance. So conversations between supervisors and employees are key here.
All right, Elise is asking a very specific question. She says, what are some strategies to use when you feel that you aren't going to be able to finish your paperwork in time? I'm a special needs teacher and I have a lot of paperwork to do. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed. I also get stressed out when I feel like I'm disappointing my coworkers. I have many roles for my job. I want to learn better ways of turning my stressors into positive opportunities.
Okay, well, that's a hard one because I don't know exactly what are the resources that are available to her. I would say one of the things would be to talk to her supervisor so the supervisor can help her, for example, understand what is the paperwork that is more urgent and what is the one that can wait a little bit, for example. Sometimes paperwork, we feel that it has to be done, but then you have it done on your deadline and then the next department is just sitting on it. So learning a little bit more about the organizational scenario, what is important, what is not that important, is something that she can do. And then she talks about feeling like she's disappointing coworkers. Maybe that's the key. Maybe in order to feel less stressed out, is thinking about not the paperwork on how paperwork, like the function of paperwork per se, but which kind of paperwork will help my coworker do their job better. So then focusing on relationships and the meaningfulness of the work, and help her that prioritize which things to do first.
Those are good ideas. We have another question here. Are you aware of this strategy model or a similar initiative that's been implemented in the workplace? And if so, was it successful and was there a follow-up? And I think that's referring to the resource mobilization model.
Yeah, so this is a new model that I have been working on, just rearranging these other two models, the core and the job demands model. I know that the job demands, job resources demand model leads to an intervention that is called job crafting, that it really is helping. I didn't want to talk too much about it because Dr. Backer and Dr. Winslow in the next webinars are going to talk a lot about it. And the idea is to make demands in a way that they're mostly opportunity demands. So how you craft your job in a way that it has the lowest level, the lowest quantity of obstacle demands, the higher quantities of opportunity demands. How can you have conversations to access more resources that you need? Or what are the kind of things that you need to do, you need to learn in terms of personal resources? But this job crafting works best when the employee and the supervisor work together with it, because it's not just about, because whenever you do a change in your job, you need to have the buy-in of your supervisor. You're gonna just go crafting your job and doing whatever you want, because there's other people who are affected by it.
And we're almost out of time, but I have one more question, Gloria, that I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to take a bit of a devil's advocate position here, take a sort of a critical perspective on things, and ask you this. Do you think that this model, do you think some people might think that this model could be used to exploit employees, that providing them with resources and coaching, developing their personal resources, organizational resources, could it be used to just get more out of employees and not have really a positive growth-oriented approach, but really be a way to exploit the human resources that exist in organizations?
That's a great question, Jamie. And I think I have the answer. I think that this model only works if those resources, the resource pool of the employee grows. So if there's a growth in the resource pool, for example, if I feel that I have been given a lot of opportunities, I have learned a lot of things, but the organization, for example, I feel like they're exploiting me and expecting more and more time to be put into this organization. I also have resources to exit that organization, for example, because I have learned a lot. I have had opportunities to manage other people. I have had opportunities to learn other skills. That makes me more marketable and employable outside. So when I feel that those resources that were once increased start to get depleted because there may appear some demands, some obstacle demands, then that's the time where you are thinking, okay, I'm going to take my resources somewhere else where they're valued.
So really, if it's a win-win, then you're not being exploited. Yeah, great answer. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're almost out of time, so Yusra, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much. A tremendous thank you to Dr. Gonzalez-Morales for your inspiring and creative and very lively presentation regarding workplace stressors. It is fundamental to provide the necessary resources in the workplace to shift how stressors are perceived and turn them into opportunities to grow rather than a list of barriers. So thank you for that. And on a side note, that baby lion was absolutely adorable. Thank you. Excellent webinar. Dr. Grumman, it is a pleasure to have you among us today. Thank you so much for your time, your energetic presence, and thank you for moderating the webinar. And special thank you to our audience for joining us and listening to us.